The afternoon sun beat down on my ranch like it was determined to bake the earth into clay. Heat shimmered in ripples over the pastures, and the horses huddled lazily in the sliver of shade cast by the old barn. I had just poured myself a second mug of strong coffee when a sound broke the usual quiet. The sharp, deliberate crunch of gravel under tires. Not the casual roll of a neighbor cutting through, not a delivery truck, but the controlled crawl of people who believed they were arriving for official business. Two sheriff's cruisers inched their way up my private driveway, lights flashing in pointless urgency, as if the sleepy stretch of county land had suddenly become the scene of a high-stakes standoff. From the kitchen window, I saw exactly what I expected. Karen Whitfield standing at my front gate, arms folded high and tight across her chest, wearing that smug, self-congratulatory smile she'd perfected ever since she'd crowned herself HOA president 6 months earlier. She wasn't just pleased with herself, she was practically vibrating with the thrill of orchestrating something she thought was monumental. She gestured sharply at the deputies, as though she were directing a parade float at the county fair. Chin high, posture rigid, chest puffed out like she expected cameras to be rolling. The ridiculousness of it all made me set down my coffee mug a little harder than intended. I stepped out onto the porch, adjusting my belt out of a long-ingrained habit that never left me after 25 years in the service. The lead deputy climbed out of his cruiser first. He looked barely old enough to rent a car, much less confront what he believed to be a dangerous trespasser. His hand rested near his holster in a way that said someone had told him to look official, not because he felt any actual threat. His partner remained by the cruiser, leaning subtly against the hood with a posture that suggested he'd rather be literally anywhere else than stuck in whatever nonsense this was. Karen strutted behind them with all the grandiosity of someone convinced she was indispensable to the functioning of society. Her chin tilted so high I half expected her to trip over her own feet. The rookie deputy squared his shoulders and attempted to deepen his voice as he approached. "Sir, we received a report of trespassing and illegal occupation of this property," he announced, every syllable trembling under the pressure of trying too hard. Behind him, Karen lit up with a triumphant glow so blinding it was almost comical. She gave a tiny nod of encouragement, like a queen acknowledging her loyal knight. That was when I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the leather case I hadn't used in nearly a year. The sunlight glinted sharply across the badge as I flipped it open, revealing the unmistakable emblem and the credentials of a retired U.S. Marshal. 25 years of federal service, including 10 spent working directly with the very sheriff's department whose cruisers were now sitting in my driveway, tended to make an impression. The rookie's expression shattered from forced authority into full-blown horror in seconds. His partner straightened so fast you'd think someone had jabbed a cattle prod into his spine. Karen's smirk evaporated as if someone had pulled the plug on her entire ego.
"Marshal Williams," the young deputy stuttered, voice cracking under the sudden shift in power. "Sir, my apologies. We were informed you were a squatter." I gave him a polite nod, but didn't let the moment soften. I'd been dealing with this exact brand of nonsense for months now, all courtesy of the woman standing behind him like a deflated parade balloon. And before anyone could ask how it had come to this, two sheriff's cruisers responding to a bogus call initiated by the neighborhood's most notorious busybody, I figured they deserved the full story. When I retired from the Marshal Service, I bought this 40-acre spread specifically because it sat completely outside any HOA jurisdiction. The land was zoned agricultural back in 1942, grandfathered long before Willowbrook Estates was even a concept on some developer's desk. I wanted land, solitude, and the freedom to live without someone telling me what color my barn should be or how high my grass could grow. What I got instead was Karen Whitfield. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after I moved in. It was printed on Willowbrook Estates letterhead with clip art of a picket fence and a smiling house, the kind of design you'd expect from a kindergarten newsletter. "Dear resident," which was already incorrect. "Your property has been found in violation of Willowbrook Estates community standards." The list of supposed violations was so absurd I laughed out loud. Unapproved fence color. My fence was natural cedar. Excessive outdoor structures. She meant my century-old barn. Livestock in a residential neighborhood. My land wasn't residential, it wasn't even part of their county subdivision, and I had the documentation to prove it. That evening, I walked over, planning to clear everything up. She opened her door wearing business attire that tried desperately to appear authoritative, though the effect was more theatrical than professional. "Miss Whitfield," I said, holding up the violation notice, "there's been a misunderstanding. My property isn't part of your HOA." She blinked at me like she couldn't comprehend the words. "All properties in this area fall under our governance," she declared, using the same tone someone might use to correct a slow child. "Ma'am," I replied as evenly as I could, "my deed predates your subdivision by 6 decades. I'm zoned agricultural. Your HOA has 0 authority here." I handed her my documents. She skimmed the first line, dismissed the rest, and said, "We'll see about that," before slamming the door in my face. What followed was a downward spiral of harassment, so relentless, even my years dealing with cartel informants hadn't prepared me for it. She took pictures from the road with a zoom lens as if she were chronicling evidence of a crime. I caught her jotting notes on a clipboard near my fence line like she was conducting an official inspection. Violation notices became a daily occurrence, sometimes 2 in a day. Too many vehicles, she meant my trucks and tractor. Improper landscaping, I was literally growing hay. Noise violations, my rooster crowed at dawn because it was a rooster doing what roosters do. The day I caught her standing inside my property line, measuring the distance between my chicken coop and her subdivision, was the day I realized she'd built an entire fantasy world where she wielded absolute authority. "You're trespassing," I said calmly as she whipped around, clutching her measuring tape like a sidearm. "I am conducting official HOA business." "You're standing on agricultural land, outside your HOA's boundaries. Leave now." She stomped away with the elegance of a toddler denied candy, but not before vowing to take this to the highest levels. I assumed she meant the HOA board or the county office. I underestimated her commitment to delusion. 3 weeks later, I was fixing a section of fence when I heard someone rattling the chain on my locked front gate. Karen had climbed over it, her face flushed from the physical exertion she clearly wasn't accustomed to. She marched toward me, holding a manila folder over her head like she was delivering a royal proclamation. "Mr. Williams," she barked between gasps, "I have here a cease and desist order requiring you to vacate this property immediately." I took the document from her hands. It was a laughably bad attempt at legal paperwork. Wrong terms, nonsensical citations, and bylaws that had absolutely nothing to do with me. "Karen," I said, trying not to laugh, "this isn't legal. You cannot evict me from my own land, and your HOA has no authority here." Her face turned a dangerous shade of red. "I am the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she declared, puffing herself up. "My authority extends to all properties that affect our community values." "No, it doesn't. And you're trespassing. Again. Leave now." "I'm not leaving until you comply," she snapped. "Then you leave me no choice," I said, pulling out my phone. "I'm calling the sheriff." She laughed in my face, a loud, mocking, triumphant laugh. "Go ahead," she taunted. "Tell them Karen Whitfield sent you. They know who I am." She dialed 911 herself before I could even hit call. And with no shame whatsoever, she reported that a hostile squatter, me, had taken over land next to Willowbrook Estates and was refusing to leave. She described me as potentially dangerous, trembling her voice like she was a damsel in distress. Which brings everything neatly back to the moment when the sheriff's cruisers pulled into my driveway and her fantasy collided with reality. The senior deputy emerged from the second cruiser, recognized me instantly, and approached with a respectful nod reserved for old colleagues. "Marshal Williams," he said, "sorry for the confusion." He turned to Karen, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you reported a trespasser, but it appears you are the one trespassing." Karen's voice pitched upward with panic. "Check your records. This land belongs to the HOA expansion project." I pulled up my property deed, survey maps, and zoning documents on my phone, handing it to him so there wasn't a shred of doubt. "And for the record," I added, "Miss Whitfield has repeatedly trespassed on my land. Written and verbal warnings have been ignored." The deputies exchanged looks that said this was far from the first time they dealt with her nonsense. The senior deputy addressed her with the patience of a man who had reached his limit. "Ma'am, did you climb over a locked gate to enter this property?" "I have authority here," she insisted. "No, ma'am, you don't, and filing a false police report is a misdemeanor. Calling someone a dangerous squatter when you know they're the legal owner, that's serious." Her mouth opened and closed in a series of desperate gasps. "But the HOA rules don't apply," he cut in. Then he asked me the question I had waited months to hear. "Marshall Williams, would you like to press trespassing charges?" I hesitated for a moment, thinking of being the bigger man. Then I remembered the letters, the harassment, the stalking, the endless attempts to run me off my land. "Yes," I said, "I would. And I'll be filing for a restraining order." The deputy nodded, turned to Karen, and said the words she never believed she'd hear in her lifetime. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." She sputtered, "You cannot be serious. I'm the HOA president. I know the sheriff personally." The same sheriff who worked with Marshall Williams for 10 years. They cuffed her gently but firmly, reading her rights as she shrieked about community values and authority. Small towns spread news like wildfire. By sundown, half the county knew the HOA president had been arrested for trespassing on a retired U.S. Marshal's ranch. At the next HOA board meeting, attendance was so high they had to bring in extra chairs. Karen sat in the back, pale and trembling, out on bail but visibly deflated. I had been invited to speak about property rights and the actual limits of HOA authority. The room was tense as a bowstring when I finished, and then I revealed the part no one knew. I pulled out a folder containing HOA internal documents. I was curious why Miss Whitfield was so intent on pushing me off my land, so I did some digging. This is a proposal for an equestrian facility expansion that requires acquiring adjacent agricultural land. I paused for effect. My land. Gasps erupted across the room. Board member Tom Harrison snatched the folder from me and scanned it. His face hardened. "This is dated 3 months ago? Karen, were you trying to force Marshall Williams off his land so the HOA could seize it?" "It's not stealing," she protested, her voice cracking. "It's a strategic acquisition for community improvement." "It's fraud," someone yelled. "Abuse of power," someone else added. The board voted unanimously to remove her from office and bar her from ever holding a position again. But her story didn't end there. The district attorney reviewed everything and charged her with criminal trespassing, filing a false police report, harassment, and attempted fraud. 6 months later, at her sentencing, the judge looked down at her with the kind of stern disappointment usually reserved for politicians caught in scandals. "Miss Whitfield," he said, "you abused your position to harass a lawful property owner, wasted law enforcement resources, and attempted what amounts to theft by intimidation." He sentenced her to 18 months of probation, 200 hours of community service, and $15,000 in fines. Her knees nearly buckled. Her face drained so fast she looked like she might faint. I was trying to improve the community," she whispered. "You attempted to steal someone's land," the judge replied. "Court is adjourned." As the bailiff led her away, she looked over her shoulder at me one last time, her expression a mixture of disbelief, humiliation, and the dawning horror that her self-built empire of imagined authority had crumbled completely, and she was the one paying the price. And for the first time since I'd moved to my quiet ranch, real peace finally returned.